pandemic, then we thought that maybe that could be the starting point for the discussion. So what I plan to do is to give you a very brief introduction, really brief, because I think I have 20 slides or so to show you in order to introduce some very lengthy and deep subjects. In reality, these 20 slides come out of 2,000 slides of other courses, different courses, just put together and translated to English because everything was in Portuguese. I hope anyway that this brief introduction to my view of what's going on and what's going to come, it's a personal view, of course, based in the Baha'i faith, based in the Baha'i teachings, but all the mistakes and errors are mine. I hope we have, after the presentation, time enough to try to clarify doubts and to get some inputs from you and some views. I really am very fond of exchange of ideas, what Baha'u'llah calls consultation. He says that consultation brings light to darkness, is a path to certitude. And it is really marvelous when people exchange ideas. A bit similar to what Jürgen Habermas talks about communicative ethics, which is a very profound subject and interesting subject. Well, anyway, I hope you noticed that I took a shower for this meeting. I put perfume also. Indeed, for taking the shower, I changed a life habit. Instead of taking the shower, my weekly shower on Saturdays, I took today, just in homage of this meeting. So let's see what I intend to show you. I will share with you the slides, make the comments. I think it will take some 20, 25 minutes, no more than that. And then we move on to consultation, okay? Well, so if you follow me, this is the first screen. You can see it? Yeah, Nathan?
We can see it very well.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the idea is a brief investigation of collective suffering, okay? As individuals are subject to suffering, collectivities are also subject to suffering. And as individuals react and either grow or diminish in suffering, collectivities also. Peoples grow to higher levels of existence, or they go down in destruction and despair. Anyway, I see the collective suffering of mankind as a chance for world brotherhood, especially this one that we are going through now, for many reasons, because it is in this 21st century, it is not in the Middle Ages. We are connected, all the world is connected economically, technologically, scientifically, artistically. So there is a possibility that from this suffering, we can learn world brotherhood. It is my vision, so it is just my vision of what is going on. It's not a Baha'i vision, it's just a vision of an individual Baha'i, okay? So let's see. If we look at the writings, the sacred writings of the world religions, we find many references to suffering. We can look, for example, at the majestic and extraordinary book of Job in the Old Testament, and see how it teaches us about the nature and dynamics of suffering. Okay, all the prophets of God suffered a lot. Abraham suffered a lot. Moses suffered a lot. Christ was crucified. Baha'u'llah spent 40 years in imprisonment and torture and exile. So suffering is part of life. Okay. Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, he says, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. So this is very significant because he doesn't say take his surfboard or his skateboard or whatever. He says his cross. So it means that the followers of Christ must accept suffering as he accepted, and that it could be possible that they would achieve greatness through this suffering. Okay. Then if we move to another quarter of the world, let me see, okay, from Buddha, 500 years before Christ. In life, pain is inevitable, but suffering is not. Pain is what life does to you. Suffering is what you do to yourself. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. It's an incredible insight into suffering. If we look at the investigations of the third school of psychology from Vienna by Viktor Frankl, especially his first book, a psychologist in the concentration camp, yeah, or man's search for meaning, yeah, which is an investigation into pain. Yeah? And his conclusion is exactly this. In the concentration camps, some people became as savages, became as beasts, and some others achieved a greatness that no other condition could give them. And this is a choice. This is a choice. Going on. This is from Baha'u'llah. O son of man, my calamity is my providence. Outwardly, it is fire and vengeance, but inwardly, it is light and mercy. Okay. So I could have put hundreds of other sayings from all the world religions, from Zoroastrianism and Hinduism and so on. But I think this gives us some vision of what really suffering could bring to us. Because it is natural that we are afraid of suffering. We try to avoid it. And it is okay, it's good, because a person who does not avoid and seeks suffering is a masochist. But we don't want to be that. But we want suffering to be meaningful and not meaningless. But for some people, suffering is meaningless. They enter suffering and they leave suffering the same as they entered. Some others no. Some others leave greater than they entered suffering. It is a choice somehow. Let me see, it's trying to. Sorry. And more, an updated version of Christ and Baha'u'llah's and Buddha's saying, no pain, no gain. Yeah. Anybody who does exercise knows that. After good exercise, we feel pain because the muscle fibers are torn down, and when they grow again, they grow bigger, and that's why you can be a bodybuilder. This is the principle. And here we see some examples from nature. The earth is not fertile unless it is plowed with a plow and has these scars that leave it fertile for plantation. A scar on the skin is always more resistant, stronger than the skin around it. A plant that is pruned is a plant that is beautiful. The best example of this are the bonsais, who have even their roots pruned, not only the branches. You know? And a diamond or any stone that is precious, when you bring it out of the mine, it is gray and disformed and ugly. But once you cut it and you have this lapidation process that is basically taking parts out of it, it shines and it has light. This is the principle of suffering if we face suffering with a good heart and in a good spirit. Now, let's see how this applies to history. History for us, for the normal human being, the common human being, is a mismatch of names, dates, and happenings. At most, we remember the French Revolution because it is fascinating that a king and a queen would be beheaded. But the rest, we cannot interconnect facts. We don't find any kind of meaning, but just an accumulation of data that is given to us during the first and second grades. But there is one thing that, from our perspective of 21st century, we can recognize clearly in the history of the world. And this is the evolution of social unity. We know that the human beings as Homo sapiens exist more or less for 200,000 years, maybe more. Since that time, social unity has been evolving continuously. The first unity mankind knew was the unity of the family. And those hunters and gatherers went about in their environment, and one family had the other family as an enemy. And there was war, continuous warfare among families. Something like Hobbes describes when he says that mankind in the state of nature is a beast, a ferocious beast. It's a war of everyone against everyone. You know? Well, then after thousands of years, families get together and create a new unity. There is the clan. There is an N lacking there. It's a clan, okay? I don't know if I can. Now the N is here. Okay. and then can make me crazy. So sorry that I took some time for clans. In the family, the father was the head of the social unity. In the clan is the forefather, is the ancient common forefather of all the families. And this clan could get together some 5, 10 families. So instead of 20 people, now we had 100 or 150 people. And again, if you can surmise, clans had fought war against other clans, and they were competing for basically sustenance. Hundreds of thousands of years later, we have the tribe. The tribes are a social unity much more complex than the clans. The tribes are clans that are woven together. And now you don't have not even the ancient common forefather. Now you have the totem, as Freud puts, totem and taboo. The totem is the god that brings together all these clans. And now we can have 500, maybe 1,000 people living together. And as you can surmise again, tribes warred against tribes for thousands of years, until a new social unit is born, the city-state. It is a very complex social unit that brings together what before were tribes. The city-states are what we can study in the classic Greek culture, no? At Athens, Sparta, all these Thebes in Egypt, they were city-states. It's a very complex social unit, and it existed for 2,000-3,000 years as the most common social unit in the world. Then there is an enormous step towards nation state. And nations are nowadays the most common form of social unit in the world. But nation is not the end of the run. We have the world as our limit. The nation and the borders of the nation are not the borders of humankind. The world is really what is the true border of mankind. But we don't have world unity yet. The United Nations is just a very pale tentative towards that. But anyway, that is the goal. So if we think that there is such an axis of development throughout all the world history, then the world is the target. The world unity is towards where we are moving. A world without war between nations. A world where nation states learn to be states of one world commonwealth. And all of them, just like the states of the United States of America or of Canada and the provinces of Canada or the states of Brazil or of any federation, they are united in a federation and they cannot make war one against the other, even though they have a relative independence, but they forsake part of their sovereignty. So a world unity would mean the preservation of the countries we have, but they would forsake a part of their sovereignty. And that would be the right to make war. We have some people who could see this in advance. Here is a quote from Darwin, Charles Darwin, a man that I respect a lot, and I think every thinking person respects a lot. And he wrote in 1874, as man advances in civilization and small tribes are united into larger communities, the simplest reason would tell each individual that he ought to extend his social instincts and sympathies to all members of the same nation, though personally unknown to him. This point being once reached, there is only an artificial barrier to prevent his sympathies extending to the men of all nations and races. So, in the vision of these revolutionary scientists, there is only an artificial barrier that prevents men from loving all people all over the world. And this artificial barrier is the notion of sovereign nation states. Just like in Greece, it was the notion of sovereign city-states. And this is a quote from Sigmund Freud, another thinker that in many ways helped create the 20th century in terms of understanding of the human being. He writes in Civilization and its Discontents, culture is a process in the service of eros. Freud had a kind of aristocratic vision of things. So he wrote eros in Greek, but eros means love. And in other writings, he says that this is the same love that religions talk about. So it's the same love. But in this specific book, he wrote eros. So culture is a process in the service of eros, love.
Problem that could be internet in Brazil.
Ah, there's a problem? You cannot hear me or you cannot see me?
No, could you repeat after you said eros? And we missed the last 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, eros. What I said is Freud was a bit aristocratic.
Yeah,
and he wrote eros in Greek, but in other papers, he says that it is love, and it is the same love that the religions talk about. So when he's talking about eros here, he's talking about the same love between people that the religions talk about, okay? Culture is a process in the service of eros, love, whose purpose is to combine single human individuals, and after that families, then races, peoples, and nations, into one great unity, the unity of mankind. Why this has to happen, we do not know. The work of eros, love, is precisely this. Necessity alone and the advantages of work in common will not hold them together. This is extraordinary. From a person like Freud, and many thinkers later on in psychologists and other schools of psychology have emphasized that the only thing that makes people get together in a peaceful way is love. Love. Of course, it's not romantic love, it's not sexual love. It is love in the sense of loving kindness to each other. So Freud puts quite clearly that the advantages of work in common and the necessity to need each other could not hold people together. Just love can do that. Okay, and if we look at the teachings of all the world religions, we see that all the prophets came specifically talking about love, that the greatest law of all was love. When the Pharisees asked Christ, what is the greatest law of all? At the time of Christ, there was a debate if it was the kosher law, or if it was the Sabbath law, or if it was the circumcision law. And when this man asked Christ, he kind of tried to put Christ against the wall with a question. But Christ quoted from the Old Testament, from the book of Deuteronomy and Leviticus. And he says, the first is love God, your God, above all other things. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. It's extraordinary. And then this same man asks Christ, who is my neighbor? And then, I will not talk now, but you know the parable. Then Christ says the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritans were hated by the Jews at that time. They were from the northern province of Israel, and they had mingled together with the Goys. It was terrible. But Christ talks about a Samaritan who helps a man who had been beaten by thieves, while a Levite and a priest passed by and did not help him. And then he says, he asks the man, who do you think is this injured man's brother, neighbor? And then the man says, well, I have for me that it is the one who helped him and tried to cure him. And Christ says, yes, you responded well. So the neighbor is the Samaritan who was hated. It is an incredible lesson. Well, I'm talking too much. Now, yeah, I'm talking too much. So this vision of the carriage, it's in Portuguese. Now you can start learning Portuguese. History advances as a carriage, okay? History advances as a carriage. This is a vision that Arnold Toynbee gives us. He says that while the wheels of the carriage revolve around an axis and always come to the same point again, the carriage itself advances and goes forward. So Toynbee says that the birth and downfall of kingdoms, of kings and queens, the birth and downfall of civilizations are like the wheels, that they come and go, always circling. But the carriage that is mankind's spirit, mankind's development, it advances. I think it's a beautiful vision for history. Well, another important vision for this. This is Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy, France. Almost all of you surely know it's one of the most magical places on earth. And it's incredible, the tide around Mont Saint-Michel, because as you can see on the left, when the tide is low, it stays on sand. When the tide is high, it is an island. It is an island. But if you look at the waves and the sea during a fraction of time, you cannot notice that the tide is going up. You see the waves going up to the shore and receding, up to the shore and receding. It seems that nothing is happening, but centimeter by centimeter, it goes up. And this is how history goes and advances. So that line that I showed you before, the line of evolution of social unity, that yellow line, it is not so simple and straightforward. It advances much more like the tide. It goes and there is a reflux from time to time. And then it goes a little bit further, and then there is a reflux. There is no steady growth or development. It doesn't exist in nature, steady growth and development. Well, so in history, we can see that there are forces that organize life. For example, up there, government, religion, education, ideas, science, jurisprudence, arts. And there are forces that sustain life. Down there, communications, industry, energy, transport, production of sustenance goods, and economy. Well, the forces that sustain life, all the sociologists and economists of the 19th and 20th century have shown that these forces that sustain life, they move and change quickly. That's why I put a rabbit there. They are always changing and transforming themselves. On the other side, the forces that organize life are typically slow, just like a turtle, okay? So forces that organize life tend to stay behind, while forces that sustain life move forwards. Well, what we can understand by that? So imagine that this nice little fellow here is society, okay? And what he has on his feet are the forces that sustain life, okay? And his head are the forces that organize life. The forces that sustain life move quickly. The forces that organize life move slowly. What generally happens when person is on a how do you say, patins? Well,
skate row.
Skate row, okay.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, well, anyway, you know what I mean. So see, the forces that organize life, if they are not synchronized, and generally they are not, with the forces that sustain life, what happens is a fall, okay? Because forces that sustain life move quicker than forces that organize life. Sometimes things get very complicated, like in this case here. You don't know anymore where are the forces, if they are up or down, and the result can be catastrophic, okay? So anyway, this is a very important point to understand in the development of mankind. We move quickly with the forces that sustain life, but we are very reticent in changing the forces that organize life. Generally, the forces that organize life just change after a period of great crisis, just like the end of the feudalism or the feudal states in Europe after 1,000 years of existence. The 20th century is very characteristic about that. Of course, the 21st also, but it started in the 20th century. It was the forces that sustain life, it was united through communication, commerce, science, economy, etc. But the forces that organize life were still in conflict. That's why the First World War, the Second World War, and all the wars that happened after that, or during at the same time. Yeah. Again, because the forces of unity moved quickly, but the forces of unity in the way of organizing life did not happen. And that is the world that we live now. Abdu'l-Baha, in one occasion said, in cycles gone by, though harmony was established, yet owing to the absence of means, the unity of all mankind could not have been achieved. Okay? That is a fact. The continents were separated from each other, and besides very few individuals, nobody knew anything about the life of other peoples. But Abdu'l-Baha continues, in this day, however, means of communication have multiplied, and the 5 continents of the earth have virtually merged into one. Hence, the unity of all mankind can in this day be achieved. And Baha'u'llah says that his mission, his life, his sacrifice is given for that purpose, bringing to the superstructure of society, to the organizing forces of society, the unity that its structural forces, infrastructural forces have already achieved. Now, I think this is the last one. This is a quote from Baha'u'llah from the Sermons of the Lord of Hosts. The breezes of the All-Glorious were wafted over me and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing. And he bade me lift up my voice between earth and heaven. And for this there befell me what hath caused the tears of every man of understanding to flow. Now, when Abraham said that he had a mission from God, a message from God, when Moses said that he had a message from God, when Christ said that he had a message from God, when Buddha said he had a message from God, when Muhammad said he had a message from God, when Baha'u'llah said he had a message from God, what happened? Everybody laughed them to scorn. People treated them either as liars or lunatics. Now, if a man like Christ says, this is not from me, but from the Father that has sent me, and as Baha'u'llah says, this thing is not from me, all of them, none of them said that they were philosophers. You know, I have thinking a lot during my life, and I have a message to give you based on all this thinking and reasoning that I have done. No, none of them said that. All of them said that the message they were giving was from God, the only God, the one true God. Now, if a man says something like that, there are just three possibilities. Or he is a liar, either he is a liar, or he is a lunatic, or he is a true prophet. There are not other possibilities. Now, if he is a liar just lies in order to get advantages. A liar does not go to the cross for his lie. A liar wants to get rich and in a very good position in society. That's why he lies about things like that. He does not go to the cross. He does not go to imprisonment during 40 years like Baha'u'llah. Well, so Christ and Moses and Muhammad and Baha'u'llah cannot be liars because they faced suffering and death because of what they were saying. Now, they could be lunatics. A lunatic could go to the cross for the things he says. Huh? A lunatic could go to prison for what he pretends to be. But if you look at the life of Moses, if you look at the life of Christ, if you look at the life of Baha'u'llah, and if you read their writings, you are sure that they are not lunatics. They are examples, great examples of understanding and clear thought and crystal clear understanding. Now, if they are not liars and lunatics, there is only just one possibility. They are true prophets. And then we have to investigate what they say and try to bring that to our lives, both individually and collectively. This is the last one, I think. This is from Baha'u'llah. Lift up the veils and coverings that obscure your vision, and consider the testimonies of the prophets and messengers, that haply ye may recognize the cause of God in these days, when the promised one hath come invested with a mighty sovereignty. Fear God, and debar yourselves not from him who is the dayspring of his signs. So, Baha'u'llah says that he brings to the world nowadays the understanding and the spiritual forces to transform the forces that organize society. To transform the forces that organize society in such a way that they can match the great advance of the forces that sustain society. If mankind turns a blind eye to this, then there's no way that we can avoid suffering. There's no way that we can avoid collapse. And that's it. I hope you forgive me. It was more than 20 minutes. Anyway, here we are.
Luis, I don't remember when you said it would be 20 minutes. You said it would be 20 slides, so you don't have to forgive yourself. Only, I think it's a great summary of what the belief system of the Baha'i Faith is. Now, we are going through this collective advancement in times of trouble as the theme of today. What would you think is the part of the advancement? Because of the part of the trouble we read at Facebook, at Instagram, at LinkedIn, every day we are bombed about the trouble. We don't even have to discuss the trouble here. But what in your view and your perspective is the part that shows true advancement in the situation we are?
Okay. Well, listen, there are so many advancements and so many incredible things that we have nowadays, not only in terms of initiative and individual initiatives, but in terms of organized society transforming reality. Take, for example, Doctors Without Borders. That is an incredible institution that transcends national frontiers. Exactly, the name says it. It transcends national frontiers. Take the Red Cross, take the Red Crescent from the Islamic world. All these initiatives, they realize that mankind is one and they treat mankind as one already. Okay, so this is something that has been born in the 20th century and in the 21st century. We have international enterprises in science and arts that we could never think of in the past, okay? So there is a lot of recognition of this new world, this new reality. And even though money is not the most important thing in the world, but they say that money makes the world go round. So the financial world has recognized since the 19th century that borders just serve for kings and presidents and their dumb followers, because they work in the world, all the world over, and that's why they are so rich. Okay? So great companies have learned the lesson, while still the countries pretend to be self-sufficient. Who is self-sufficient in the world nowadays? Nobody's self-sufficient. And the coronavirus and the pandemic is showing that, exactly that. Nobody is self-sufficient, okay? There's a lot of love. There's a lot of fraternity going on. We see every day in the news, they show things that are not going to transform the world, but show that human beings are good.
While you drink your water, there is a question here, or actually a remark, Luis, that says, this is incredible, especially in specifying the forces that sustain and forces that organize. It provides the paradigm for examining the human story. Thank you so very much. There is also people saying so beautiful, so apt. Thank you. There's a lot of thanks here. I don't know if you can read the messages.
Thank you. No,
But
I don't. I cannot see two things. I look at you. I cannot look at the messages. I don't.
so I'm doing this for you. And friends, if you have questions, there's two ways to do it. One of them, you can write it, and of course you can raise your hand and ask the question directly. I'll release you from the muting, and I'm unmuting you, and this way we'll have more interactivity, and I'm sure that our speaker will enjoy to see you and see your faces and your voices.
Yes, I'm anxious for that.
The only practical problem is that if we have 3 screens of people, because there are 52 people right now, and sometimes if you raise your hand, we won't be able to see. So if you could not only raise your hand, but raise it electronically, there is a little hand you can raise, or write in your chat box that you have a question, and we'll go to you. The last person who said something here was Don Johnston, just said, I agree. So I'm encouraging everybody, including him, to ask if you want.
Question. There is a, Lac, it's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
T.S. Eliot has a small like prayer, supplicy, where he writes, redeem the time, redeem the dream. A poet's way of saying that we have to redeem what we have lost. Is suffering always the only way out, or do we have a period like the Enlightenment of the 18th century, where we supposedly went a paradigm shift in thought, but there was no suffering, you know? Is there something that we can expect, like enlightenment happening, or do we have to go through the fire of tribulation?
Excellent, Junam. You see, Shahbaz, there is always a way out without suffering. There is always a way of growing without suffering, but it is very rare, very, very rare that it happens in the collective life of mankind. In the individual lives, it is much more common, but in the collective lives, no. You see, the School of Frankfurt, the philosophical School of Frankfurt, one of the most important schools of philosophy that the world has ever had, with people who influenced a lot the 20th century, like Adorno, like Walter Benjamin, and they started thinking exactly because the vision of the 18th century and of the Enlightenment did not give mankind peace and tranquility. Everybody thought after the beginning of the 20th century and the world exhibits that occurred in Europe and North America, everybody thought, well, now the world has eternal peace. We have achieved the culprit of mankind. And then you have the First World War, and then you have the Second. And this kind of killed the understanding we had of society. Suddenly, people who drink tea and eat cookies at 5 o'clock in the afternoon can kill millions of other peoples in India. Okay? And then we realize that this aristocratic change of mind serves us nothing. If we don't change in reality, and the poor are among the beneficiaries of this change, you don't have anything. Okay? So I think that collectively we have to suffer. You see, enlightenment was on the table. And then Baha'u'llah, from his prison, wrote to all the chiefs of state, to all the kings and queens of the world, and told them, unite and disarm. Just keep enough armaments for your internal safety of your domains. At that time, Dunaman, at that time, Shahbaz, 15 people would get together in a very beautiful room of mirrors, hall of mirrors, in a beautiful banquet, and they could sign a treaty that would bring peace. They didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. They wanted to make war. And then Napoleon warred against the Kaiser. And all Europe was conflagrated in one war after the other. And all the kingdoms fell, suffering.
So
But
we
you
have,
see,
sorry.
just a
Go
bit,
on, go
one
on.
thing. Out of this suffering, we have the League of Nations, okay? That was terrible, but anyway, a first start in terms of an institution that could rule the world. And then we have the United Nations, another trial for an organization, international organization, that is still very, very weak and without any real power. But anyway, the sufferings that we had brought about the idea of an international institution. So something good came out of it.
So Louise Mary Rose Van Kesteren is unmuted and will ask you a question.
Okay, I'm gonna just, yes. So my question is, how can we negotiate through this event, which seems to have taken a world and placed all of us in a common state? How do we kind of move through it to a place of growth? Growth, I believe, you cannot have growth without pain. But my meditation master, has an equation that we're is pain plus resistance times resistance. So how do we kind of achieve this? We're all in this common state. We're locked down. We're whatever. How do we take that and make it a growing experience?
Thank you very much for this. These words that are fascinating, really. I don't know if I know the answer. I think, as everybody else, we are trying to understand really what can be done. But as your meditation teacher says, I believe really that we have to go to a space of enlightened suffering. Just suffering is not good, but enlightened suffering, okay? Once you reach that point, you can convey that to other people. I think it is our mission nowadays to talk about the unity of mankind. We are in a world that people from all nationalities are dying just the same. People from all religions are dying just the same. Finally, we are understanding that we are just one race. We are just one family. But you are going to see, and we are seeing that already. Some nations, the leaders of some nations, want to use this suffering to go back to the 18th century. Okay? We are in a world without borders, and there are countries building walls. One day, they will be demolished, like the wall of Berlin. It's as natural. One day, all the walls will be demolished. But there are people who use the suffering to try to go backwards. We have to be courageous and go forwards. We must show that the changes must be done, and must be courageous changes. To the United Nations, it must be not just a club of nations, it must be a federation of nations, so that the president of one country cannot confiscate masks and oxygen hardware that was going to other nations and had been bought by other nations. So we would have a world organization like the World Health Organization. Imagine the pandemic without the World Health Organization. It would be terrible. So poor us as individuals, I think we have to strongly believe in this and use the suffering to tell everybody, you see how everybody is the same? We have to unite. Mankind has to unite in this and this and that. And to try to convey this enlightened suffering to our representatives in the houses of representation, the Senate, and other places.
Luis, while Mr. Neil Roy unmutes gradually, I would like to ask Vafa to ask you a question he just wrote here, and then the next one is Neil. Okay, Vafa, could you say the question you wrote? Oh, Vafa must be muted, so let's go directly to Neil.
I was fine. I thought you were going to unmute me. I was paying attention. So my question, excuse me, my question is more around, you know, what qualities and attributes we as people, as individuals, as humanity have that not only have, but also can develop so that we can overcome a crisis and move into victory. So is it, you know, having empathy? Is it exercising discernment? What are those qualities and attributes that we need to have and we need to exhibit so that we can, you know, move from crisis to victory?
Friends, unlike Vafa, that is probably in his pajamas and didn't want to appear, if you have a question, please put your camera on. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
Go on. Thank you.
Vafa-Jan, once when Abdul Baha in the beginning of the 20th century was in London, a lady asked him, what is the purpose of life? And he answered just two words: acquire virtues. The purpose of life is to acquire virtues. We have been working with 73 virtues in the last 30 years, from honesty, faithfulness, patience, steadfastness, honor, truthfulness, kindness, love. And you see that each one of these virtues has an application, a practical application in the world, be it from individuals or from institutions. An institution can also be loving. An institution can also be truthful or trustworthy. So the thing is, when mankind goes away from the source of spirituality, that is the prophets of God, then all these words are just words. They are not realities. The virtues are just realities for the ones who accept the word of God coming to the world, like in Jesus and Muhammad and Moses and Baha'u'llah and all the others. Then virtues become a shining lamp. And then we try to educate our children to be trustworthy. We try to educate our children to be patient. We try to educate our children to be loving. And this is the real beauty of virtue. Because if you analyze any problem, gentlemen, any problem in the world, from the minutest problem to the biggest problem, if you analyze any problem in the world, you will see that at the bottom of it is the lack of one or more virtues. The lack of one or more virtues. Or is trustworthiness is lacking, or truthfulness is lacking, or patience is lacking, or loving, kindness is lacking, and so forth, and so on, so forth and so on. So you see, as individuals, we can improve a lot. But I
Luis, you
really
got
think
frozen.
that I got frozen. Mm.
Just 1 second after you said lacking for the second time. Truthfulness and kind love.
That I said that all the problems have at their bottom the lack of one or more virtues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically that, you see. So, but what I would like to emphasize is that not only the individuals have to acquire virtues, the institutions have to acquire virtues. That is the greatest challenge. We don't have that in the scenery nowadays. If you are a good Christian, or if you are a good Jew, or if you are a good Muslim, or if you are a good Baha'i, then probably you will try to develop virtues. But what do we do with our companies? Many times we may be the owners or the CEOs of a company, and we don't look for truthfulness in our company, even though in our lives we have. It is going back to the scenery that we were discussing before. You drink tea and cookies, but you kill millions. In your personal life, you're trustworthy, you're a good person, you don't do bad things in society, everybody loves you and thinks you're okay, but your company exploits the workers.
Luis, there are many other questions here. I'm trying to speed them up. We have Neil Roy, and the next one that will ask something after Neil is JH iPhone. I don't know who is JH iPhone, but is I'm going to announce it later.
It's a very known name.
Yeah,
iPhone.
That's a very typical name.
It's a surname.
I'll announce him after Neil. So Neil, is your question now.
Luis, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to thank Hedy for inviting me to this group. Wasn't aware. It's a wonderful group. Really enjoying being here. So with the essence of time, I'm just going to go straight to the question. So tied to your presentation, do you think this unity of brotherhood and love that we are experiencing now will continue in post-COVID time, or will the mindset of people will change to be more inimical and selfish towards other nationalities and races in post-COVID times?
Wow. You see, I don't have my crystal ball here to tell you exactly what is going to happen. But later on, I'll bring it and then I can see the future. Anyway, Neil Roy is the name of a world explorer. Huh? This sounds like the name of a world explorer going to the Antarctica or up the Andes or up the mountains. Anyway, what I really believe is, if we look to the past, for example, to the Black Death, okay? The Black Death in mid-14th century, it decimated 1/3 to 1/2 of all the European population. Okay? There were cities, entire cities that disappeared, simply disappeared. In many important cities, half the population was gone. Okay? Now, what happened afterwards? During 1,000 years, the workers on the land were property of the feudal chiefs, feudal lords. Okay, the feudal lords were the owners of the land and of those who worked the land. Okay, now with half the population gone, the value of a worker was increased tremendously. And so the feudal lords, if they wanted a carpenter, they would have to pay for the carpenter, because he was not his property anymore. There was just one carpenter, and 3 or 4 feudal lords were disputing for him. So he could put a price. And the shoemaker, the same thing, and the one who grew vegetables, and the one who had apples. So what we saw was the enrichment of the lowest stratum of society. And that brought about the end of feudalism after 1,000 years, you see? So if there was no Black Death, do you think that the feudal lords would let their property get free? Of course not. So we are forced through suffering into a new reality. We are forced into a new reality. Those who understand it can surf the wave. Those who do not understand are drowned. If you are part of the solution, you're okay. If you're part of the problem, you're gone. That's what we learn.
Thank you, Luis. There is another comment here. It's not really a question. It's a comment. Well, it's a combined comment and question. It says, the concept of unity seems to be a large leap from today's concept of nation states. That are some practical, what are some practical paradigm shifts that you think we need to take towards unity?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I would say there is one writing from Albert Einstein, and I have the greatest admiration for Einstein, not only as a physicist, but as a person who really during his whole life, he was a defender of world peace. And he says that the greatest impediment for world peace is this extraordinarily inflated notion of como diz, patriotism. Extraordinarily inflated sense of patriotism. This is the greatest impediment for world unity, see? So we have in some moment to start doing that in all the schools of the world, instead of just imbuing children with the love of the country, we have to imbue them with the love of mankind. It doesn't happen yet. This will be a paradigm shift, completely changed. And another thing, together with that, Baha'u'llah in the 19th century, he says that in all countries, children should be taught a world language together with their national language. So the wise men of the world should choose one language or invent one language, like Esperanto, that was invented by Zamenhof, Mr. Zamenhof. His daughter was a Baha'i and perished in the concentration camp of Auschwitz. So one language that all the children would learn. Imagine in 5 years, these children could go everywhere in the world, and wherever they go, they would feel at home because they speak the language. You cannot imagine my suffering here in Brazil trying to speak to you, my soul. I know I am speaking English, but I'm not speaking my soul because my mother language is Portuguese. And so there are moments I want to say something and I say another thing because the right word does not come to me. That's why I cannot write poetry in English, just in Portuguese. But imagine the world that has the beauty of all the many different languages with their accents, their literature, their poetry. And one language that makes you brother and sister with all the world because you speak the same. This is incredible. This is another paradigm shift. So simple to implement, and can change the world in just one generation.
Dear Luis, there is a question. This last question was asked by my dear friend Jim Huang. So now that I found whose the iPhone belongs to, maybe I should grant him, if he has a continuation to the question, Jim, just unmute yourself and go on, please.
No question. I think that was a very, very practical answer, Luis. Thank you very much for your overall presentation and that answer.
Thank you.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's effectively, you're absolutely right about patriotism. I would agree with that, and teaching global values, I think is very important. If there is a bit of a follow-up question, my question would be, do we think we actually have global values? It's not even clear that we share the same idea on what human rights is across the various nations. And maybe this is just a characteristics of current leaders, or maybe it's truly that we don't believe in the same values. Just curious about your thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, you're so right. And I think there is so much for us to celebrate nowadays, but there is so much also to regret. And you see, once they asked the Prophet Muhammad how we would know that is the end of times. You know, Christ and Muhammad and Moses, all of them spoke about the end of times, when the kingdom of God would come to earth and his will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. That means world peace, basically, brotherhood, world brotherhood. And so they asked Muhammad, how would we know that it is the end of times? Then Muhammad says, when the most unworthy of the members of society are chosen to be their leaders, then it is the end of times. I don't know about you, but we are thinking about that in Brazil a lot.
That's very telling. I would agree, that's very telling.
It's amazing, yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Thank you. There's another two questions here. One of them is from Arminder's phone to everyone. So I wonder if you would like to say yourself, whoever is using Arminder's phone, I don't know, who is using that phone? Yeah. Well, I can read while the person reveals herself or himself. The question is, what is a major reason that the entire world, including the United States, is shifting towards the right? Why rigidly towards religion? I'm sorry, why rigidity towards religion is growing every day? Why people think that their religion is better than others, even though all the religions take us to the same end goal? Thank you.
Very good, very good. Excellent questions. I hope I can address them properly. You see, there was a very distinguished intellectual in Brazil who happened to be also one of the most distinguished comedicians in Brazil. But his humor was very delicate, subtle. Milor Fernandes was his name. God bless him. And once he wrote, capitalism is the exploitation of man by man. Communism is exactly the opposite. Capitalism is the exploitation of man by man. Communism is exactly the opposite. It's perfect. It's perfect. But anyway, one of the greatest economists in the world, John Galbraith, he wrote also that. He said that capitalism and socialism, or right and left, are ashes of the same fire. And the Universal House of Justice, in the highest institutional body in the Baha'i faith, in many and over again, writing to the Baha'is, it says that the problem with all these world visions, right or left and whatever is in between them, is that they are materialistic. They think that the betterment of mankind is through production of more and better and more expensive goods. They don't have a vision of the spirituality of mankind. And that's why left or right, it doesn't matter. It doesn't work. But the world tends to go in a pendulum, and societies are like that. You see, remember that I said before that as individuals we can learn very quickly, but as societies we don't do that. It takes generations sometimes for a society to grow, to learn. So in general, what happens is that a society moves towards right, and then there is problem. And then maybe there is catastrophe. And then the society moves to the left. And of course, it will come problem. And sometimes it will come collapse. And then they move to the right again and to the left again. But in this pendulum movement, there is a growing dissatisfaction with the representatives of society. One of the most profound analyses in the world nowadays in sociological analysis is the failure of representativeness of the leaders of society. People do not feel represented anymore because many leaders are extremists. They represent the extremists, but many people are not extremists. But collectively, it takes a time for a society to come to the middle. It takes a time. And with the religion, as this iPhone friend said, there is a difference between religion and spirituality. Religions can be bad for the world, but the spirituality is never bad. Religions are just like the dome that you put over your flower, your favorite flower, so that it can grow and it will not be molested and destroyed by the cold of the winter. But after a time, the flower outgrows the dome. And if the dome is not enlarged, it kills the flower. So if we look at religion throughout society, throughout the history of mankind, we see God sending each time a bigger dome so that the flower can grow and grow and grow. If you are a dome, you are a religion. But if you are a flower, you are a spiritual being. God wants us to be spiritual beings, flowers. He doesn't want us to be domes. So each time the dome is of the size of the flower. But if the flower grows and you force a previous dome on the flower, you kill it. Baha'u'llah has brought a dome the size of mankind, the size of the world, for us to have world unity. If you don't go into that dome, you may be a flower that is suffering inside a very small dome. And people who are fanatical and think that their religion is better and more special than the others, live within very small domes and probably are very withered flowers.
How beautiful, Luis. Thank you so much. Luca has a question. He's the next question. He's going to say it himself.
Hi, Luis. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. It was very
Hello.
I really found it interesting how you differentiated between people's personal lives and their personal beliefs and their religious beliefs, and if, for example, they own a business, how they can't really operate it ethically most of the time, like often. So I was going to ask, do you think that it is, in modern society, it is possible to operate a successful business while maintaining moral decency?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I believe. Yes, I believe. I do believe, and I know people who have done it. It's not easy. It's not easy because, for example, in Brazil, where we have much more corruption, institutional corruption, than in many other states, like Canada. It is very difficult for the owner of a building, of a business, or a factory, to overcome the pressure of corruption, because sometimes he needs a signature or an allowance or a permit, and they are charging him money for that. If he doesn't give money, he doesn't get what he needs for the business. So it is very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. And I know some businessmen who have learned strategies. Imagine how the world is. Strategies from policemen and police forces that face the problem of kidnappers. So they learn from them how to face, because you know, when a kidnapper kidnaps someone, he asks for money. And in general, if you give money, it's the worst situation. You have to somehow, how to say, prolong the negotiation until they can be caught. You see? So it's not easy. It's not easy, but I do believe, and I think that some business that already started to think in terms of service to mankind. You see, you can look great companies. What do they think nowadays? Is how can we be of service? The ones that are of more service get more money. You see, what is the names go out of my mind now. Now Uber, or all this, it's nothing. It's a service. They don't have any merchandise. They don't have anything to sell you or to bring or to take to your house via Amazon, but they exist. And we are going to see each day more of this. In the city of São Paulo, 14 million inhabitants in a city that is clogged. It is like a body full of blood clots inside the veins. Many people, intelligent people that could have 1 or 2 cars, they don't have cars anymore. And as the public system, transportation system is terrible, they just use Uber and other companies similar to that. So we are seeing that each day more people will not want to own things. They will hire things. Yeah? It's a different world. It's a different vision of the world. I could have a laptop that is not mine. If everything is on the cloud, why do I need a laptop that is mine? I just need something to read it, to bring something down from the cloud. You see, it's very, the implications are enormous.
Thank you, Luis. Our next guest wants to ask you something. It's a PhD in hydraulics, but I'm sure his question has nothing to do to hydraulics because he's also a teacher, and I suppose it doesn't have to NASA, where he worked for a few years ago. You know him as Johnny has a question for you. Johnny.
Hi, Luis. It's nice to see you all. That's pretty much an example of world unity, thanks to our dear friend Mason. Beloved Luis, my question I present before the chat is, First, thanks a lot for your beautiful presentation. And the question is, why do you place education as a force that organizes society and not that sustains society? And as a follow-up, most of your answers included some kind of education approach. So I guess that, and you place communication satellite as a sustained force. So that is my question. Thanks a lot, Nathan. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, you see, Johnny, education has many faces, okay? And one face is very institutionalized. So institutionalized education is part of the forces that organize society. Education that is institutionalized rarely, very, very rarely is after a breakthrough in the way things are. See, I used to kid with people about this. If you bring a person from the 19th century or the 18th century to a kitchen, to a modern kitchen, they will not know where they are, because they don't know what a refrigerator is, they don't know what a microwave oven is, they don't know what a gas stove is, they don't know what a sink is or tap water is, they don't know that. They will ask you, where is the well so that we can fetch water to cook? Where is the wood? And where is the stove to burn wood so that we can cook? So they don't know where they are. But if you bring that same person to a classroom, a modern classroom with air conditioner, and they know exactly where they are, because it has not changed. You see, you are a PhD professor, post-PhD professor at one of the good universities in Brazil. Now, where is technology? Where is technology in our first grade and second grade students? Not just like a computer room, you see? No, where is the universal approach of internet? Where is the interlinking of understanding? Where is this reality that already exists in the forefront of technology in the education? It doesn't exist. In Brazil, it doesn't exist. You see? That's why education is part of the problem. But of course, there is one education that is not inside the institutions, the governmental institutions. And some areas of this institutionalized education, they move forward, but they are not the majority. There are very, very few people. You see, that's why I put, and it's not my idea, you see, this is something that comes from Marx. Since the time of Marx, it has not changed. Education is just a reproduction of the common life. It doesn't change.
Thank you, Luis. Luis, we have a last question, which is a follow-up on this, which was from Vafa, and he was mentioning the Google search for B Corp companies, and there are many companies that are social impact companies. He gives the example, but at the end of the day, Vafa is reminding us that things are changing, and the pandemic seems to be accelerating that movement because of the enormous suffering that is being caused. And I would add, because there is a sense that this minute virus has divided us physically from our neighbor, from our friends, but has united us incredibly fast as a human being, as human family. And what would be your last comments about this? Because we're approaching 10 p.m. Brazil, and we're mindful of everyone having not to go to work tomorrow. So maybe as a last remark, you would like to finish in the next minutes.
Okay. Now, first of all, thank you for amigos, for friends, for the invitation. Really, It was a great blessing for me to be with you and to feel and sense the understanding and the questions and the ideas that you have. I think it's very paradoxical that to learn about unity, we have to be so divided. It's very interesting. No? Now that we cannot hug and kiss and shake hands, we are starting to think about how much we missed that. So, interesting. As many things in the world, paradox.
He got muted.
Oh, sorry, Luis. Sorry, you got muted. It was my fault.
No problem. It's you see, when the conscious part of us is restrained, the unconscious still acts. So I understand your unconscious act of muting me.
My unconscious mouse pressed on the wrong moment. No, I'm very sorry. Please continue. Please continue.
No, it's nothing. It's anyway. I think this paradox is very interesting. Huh? To learn about unity when we are so much segregated and isolated. It's very, very, very interesting. Anyway, thank you very much. Maybe if there was no pandemic, we would not get together, Canada and Georgia and whatever, like we are doing. We would be naturally continuing our day-to-day job. We would gather at Vafa's house and everybody would be happy there. And there was no challenge, no change, no improvement. So something is working, huh?
Luis, before I want to thank you from my heart, of course, but I would like the closing to be Vafa and Gisu, because we have been for 3 years, have had the privilege to be in their living room, at least 20 of us here, around 20 of us. And of course, that was a notion of love that I think in a way it's being conveyed even online. Of course, I'm missing the food, but the rest is there. So I would like, before I pass to Vafa, I would like to ask everybody to do one thing so that when Vafa finishes, we all clap together. So I'll ask now to Vafa speak and every one of us puts in unmute, so we can clap and thank you from our heart at the end. Vafa, your last words, please.
Well, I mean, first of all, on behalf of the four amigos, Gisu and Homa, Nesan and I, we want to thank everybody for spending their time. I want to thank especially Fadia, who's in Jordan, and as you know, they're like 8 hours ahead of us.
Yes.
So it's a very strange hour for her in the morning. But it's very exciting to see everybody. Some of you are old friends, some of you are new friends. This is a virtual living room. Thank you, Luis, for sharing your thoughts and perspectives. Thank you, Nesan, for facilitating. And thank you to Gisu and Homa for keeping Nesan and I grounded and making sure we're developing our virtues.
Yes.
All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. All right.
So, without further ado, thank you so much. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for organizing everything.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Thank you very much.